on this all-new edition of the India Development Debate right here on ET Now. I'm Supriya, Shrinate, and let's go straight across to a story that we've been tracking right here on ET Now. And this is, of course, the GST. The Congress President Rahul Gandhi calls it the Gabbar Singh Tax. Former Finance Minister Chidambaram asserts it is totally unsuccessful experiment. As the Modi government celebrates the first anniversary of the GST rollout, the political opposition to the biggest tax reform refuses to die down. Apart from the Congress, several other opposition parties like the TMC and the CPM say that the hasty rollout of the GST has taken a heavy toll on small businesses and traders. The BJP, however, asserts the GST has strengthened India's federal structure, with all states getting an equal say in matters related to taxation. The fact remains that GST has still a long way to go, both in terms of achieving the primary objective of one nation, one tax, and also with many key products like fuel, real estate and electricity continuing to remain outside its ambit, including alcohol. Looks like the ideal GST is still work in progress. As GST turns one, we have a stellar panel, and we are putting the spotlight and discussing the political implications of one of India's most ambitious and biggest tax reforms. I've got GVL Narasimha Rao, National Spokesperson and Member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha of the BJP. I've got Rohan Gupta, Spokesperson of the Congress, Viren Shah, President, Federation of Retail Traders Welfare Association, Nilesh Shah, Managing Director, Kotak AMC, and of course, Sadanand Dume, Reston Fellow, American Enterprise Institute, and a very, very respected commentator out there. Thanks very much, each one of you, for being with us. And I'm going to take leave from tradition. I will not start with the ruling party. I think it's fair today that I start with the Congress. And I think Rohan Gupta, while you can criticize the GST, your party president, your former finance minister have criticized the implementation, called it unsuccessful. Don't you believe, I mean, this is a tax reform that India needed. An economy like ours needed GST not last year, but years back. Will you concede that while all of you deserve credit for the rollout, doesn't the government of the day deserve the maximum credit? It could accomplish what was set in motion 10 years back. We can and we will discuss the shabby implementation. We will discuss how hasty it was. But the reality is that GST became a reality under this government, and so in some sense they did execute what was in motion 10 years back. Rohan Gupta.
See, I feel that the way GST was designed under UPA regime, it was a different GST. The basic purpose of GST is to avoid duplication of tax and have one tax, one nation kind of theory. If you see the current GST, it's a dilution. Each state has a different system. You go from one state to other state, you can't get credit. And today also we see that lot of ambiguities are there as far as implementations are concerned. See, the real test of GST, why I am saying that it is not working, the small trader or the small businessman, you just go and ask him. The consultants take money from them to fill up the form. Still there is no clarity. There is the issue of tax credits which are still not resolved. So I feel that the original GST, which was the dream project of UPA, had it been implemented, this kind of situation wouldn't have arisen. And today we have different states, different GST. There is absolutely no clarity. Even after 1 year completion, you go and do survey of the traders, they absolutely are not happy, and many of them, they have opted out of the GST regime.
Okay, I'll go across to Viren Shah, who represents them, in just a moment from now, but I will go across to GVL Narasimha Rao on the larger point that I made, that this was a tax reform that was in the making for 10 years. So in some sense, this was like a marathon with small relays, and everybody was passing the baton on to each other. Given the fact that the BJP will obviously make a big deal about the GST and the first anniversary, do you believe today, will you concede that you will have to share the implementation of the GST with the past governments, including the Congress as well?
No, Supriya, GST and its rollout is the finest example of what Honorable Prime Minister has been talking about, our federalism, the kind of cooperative federalism. This is a best example of it. I think whatever Congress party might say outside, I think all the Congress party ruled governments, whatever, there are very few left there, but all of them were on board in every decision that the GST Council has made. All the decisions that have been made so far have been made by consensus. So this is no mean achievement. I think this government, I think, has to get credit for taking everyone along, and all those who came along also deserve credit. So certainly this is the finest example of cooperative federalism that this country has ever seen. And keep the politics aside, which I think people like Rahul Gandhi have been indulging in those semantics for the sake of getting certain political praise. But the reality is that every government, including the state governments of Karnataka, Punjab, and some states where the Congress is in power in the Northeast, have been on board. I think in 1 year, I can tell you the day this was rolled out on July 1 last year, you've seen nothing. I think the country actually expected some kind of, the entire media possibly thought there will be a huge chaos in the country. Nothing happened. As a consumer, you and I did not even realize,
GVL,
even realize that the system had changed.
Right.
I would like
No.
I would like to
GVL,
ask the question.
Come to you on that. Just 1 second, Rohan Gupta. No, Rohan Gupta, I will come to you. You will have your turn. Please bear with me. GVL, where I will disagree with you is that you and I may have not realized, but the small trader did. There were many teething troubles with the GST. Let's not deny that. I give you the credit for rolling out the GST.
There were.
But this was credit in continuation. I think where I disagree with you is, so let me take this across to Viren Shah. And Viren Shah, you represent the Traders Association. Everybody wanted a GST. There were no two ways about it. From the really big industrialists to the small traders, everybody unanimously wanted the GST. Why are you now today unhappy with the GST? Are you unhappy with the provisions? Are you unhappy with the shabby implementation? Is this not the GST that you were expecting? I just want to know, what will you put your finger on? Viren Shah.
I don't think any issues are there with the GST, especially in major cities like Mumbai and other major town. Only problem is with the 2-tier and the 3-tier city, where the traders are still not used to this kind of a computerized filing up of GST, and the major issue is every monthly compliance. So every monthly 3 compliances. Instead of that, government should actually initially, for the 3 months, 1 compliance should be good enough, especially for a smaller town and a village. If I'm talking about Gujarat and Kutch, if somebody wants to actually pay the GST, but he does not get a set off because the other person is not paying the GST, the whole chain flops. Because a lot of people do not still getting into the GST, especially in a small town and a small villages, and this is where government is losing a lot of revenue. Even the person genuinely traders wants to pay the GST, he can't do it because other person does not pay GST and he does not get set off. So there are some teething issues are there, but as far as Mumbai and major cities, you have to take a professional help. Every shopkeeper has to take the help of the accountant who charges professionally every month, which is expenses. That's it. Otherwise, there are some teething issues are there.
Okay, so the teething issues are more in the smaller towns. They need more help. Perhaps differentiated rules for them is what Viren Shah is saying. But let me take this across to Nilesh Shah before I go to Sadanand Dume. And Nilesh, you speak to Indian industry on an everyday basis. You're somebody who's a stakeholder there. Let's, for the benefit of our viewers, say what was the GST. As many as 17 taxes, multiple cesses were subsumed into the GST. Central taxes such as excise duties, service tax, countervailing duties, state taxes including value-added tax, octroi, purchase tax were all rolled into one. This was no mean task, was it? And would you have expected it to happen any other way? I mean, look at the kind of things that were subsumed by the GST. 17 taxes in all.
See, GST is like a glass half full or half empty. There are people who have been adversely impacted by GST because their business model was related to avoiding paying taxes. Now they have to pay taxes. The scope of avoiding paying taxes has come down dramatically. There are people who are paying full tax and doing business. They are very happy with GST because it gives them level playing field. In some sense, it is formalization of India. Many small, micro, mini enterprises which were playing an important role in Indian economy, but at the cost of tax avoidance, are now getting forced to pay taxes and getting organized. I just want to highlight couple of benefits of GST. One, it's helping reduce fuel consumption. It's helping reduce working capital. A Delhi-Chennai distance was about 7 days earlier. Today it is 5 days because so many entry tax nakas have been reduced. That's reducing fuel consumptions, that's reducing working capital, that's making India more competitive. The second thing is increase in tax base. Our tax to GDP ratio was comparable to African nations. Even a country like Rwanda had a better tax compliance than India. Now with GST, we are seeing more number of entities coming into TaxNet. And not only they are paying GST, but their owners have started paying income tax. The income tax growth is substantially higher than the GDP growth compared to past, showing better tax compliance. From about 10%, we have become 12% tax to GDP ratio. That's again, bringing formalization forward. So GST has certain teething trouble, as Viren Bhai mentioned. It's more in semi-urban and rural areas, less in urban areas. But overall benefits of GST in terms of better tax compliance, in terms of creating better formalization of economy, will be hugely beneficial.
I think you've put the nail on its head as far as the tax compliances and all of that is concerned, and I have specific questions on that in just a bit. But I'm going to go across to Sadanand, and Sadanand, it's very often the one reason why GST is being criticized very often is, at least from the opposition, I don't think anybody opposes the very the ethos of GST. What is being opposed is shabby implementation. I had two state finance ministers on my show yesterday and they both said shabby implementation. You speak to the industry said teething trouble, shabby implementation. On hindsight, could we have been better prepared for the GST? Did the teething troubles perhaps take the sheen of a reform as big as that? Or are you someone who's pragmatic to believe that you can never be prepared for a reform as big as this? You are trying to undo the entire indirect tax structure of the country.
Supriya, this is a very good question and a very difficult question, right? Because on the one hand, when you undertake something of this enormity and complexity, you don't want the great to become the enemy of the good. You have to sort of, reach for what is available. And that was definitely the underlying philosophy in this process. On the other hand, you must also acknowledge that the first time round matters the most. If you can get close to perfect or as close to perfect as possible earlier, it may be much more important or much more doable than fixing these things down the line. So when you look at sort of, beyond the implementation questions, when you look at the structural questions, the fact is that India has one of the highest rate GSTs on the planet. I believe it's the second highest according to the World Bank. The fact is that India has one of the most complex GSTs on the planet. Now, I'm sure I take your point that it rolled in various other taxes, but why is India not being benchmarked against global best practice? It is not even close. And it is certainly true that some businesses, particularly large businesses, are able to cope with this, and many other businesses are not. So my question really is that, could this have been done better? Should they continue to strive to make it better? And I think that the answer there is that, the jury is still out. Now, the second point that I want to quickly raise is that it would be very foolish for the BJP to think that this would not have political consequences. We recently saw an election in Malaysia, which frankly had a much simpler and much smoother GST, where the government was thrown out partly because of the impact on economic activity. And so they should be careful about the amount of paperwork they have created, the kind of burdens they've created for small business, and how that could play out politically.
No, absolutely. I will take quick questions and then get on to the specific points that both you and Nilisha have raised here. And Viren Shah, if I may ask you, because one of the reasons why the GST was also criticized, at least by the trader community, is that, you know, there were too many changes that were being made initially. Now, there are two ways to look at those changes being made. The critics will say these were knee-jerk reactions, but from the point of view of the government, they were simply responding to an evolving reform, a system that no one knew about, a system that was new to India. Was it not better to be agile and change them, or be stubborn and let business suffer? One of the points that, you know, Sadanand tangentially touched, that you have to strive to make it a more perfect reform. I know the changes were upsetting for a lot of people and they were happening at a huge frequency, but isn't that what is required? You need agile policy making.
I'm sorry, there is some audio issue and I really can't understand your question very, very clearly.
No, I'm asking you a simple question, that do you believe the changes, the frequent changes that were made to the GST, were they good or did they add to confusion?
No, I guess the government has realized a lot of issues. And we have been in touch with the government on a regular basis. There is every step government is improving. There are a lot of confusion. It's not going to be as easy because it's just a 1 year, and I can see there is a lot of changes, and things will get still better than what it is today. So I don't see any problem, except the smallest of the small traders. They are having a problem of this percentage, which is 12% and 18%. I think those 18% is really hitting them very hard in this competitive world, and government should actually come out with some kind of a reduction in the taxes, because they did promise that if they have the turnover, they will match the turnover, then they reduce the taxes. But suddenly I see there is no positive reaction from the government to reduce 18% of the bracket to bring down to 12%.
Right. I think you prompting me to I was going to talk about formalization, but let's get on to rates ASAP. And GVL Narasimha Rao, the outgoing chief economic advisor, echoes what the Congress party has said, what Viren Shah is saying here, that you need to cap GST at 18%, and he believes even that's too high. Do away with the 28% rate. Do you believe that GST eventually has to move in that direction, that 28% has to go, that 18% has to be lower? I mean, multiple rates is unique to India, but it is not what is warranted. It makes it more complex. You need to get rates down. What is the scope for rate rationalization?
No, I think you see, after GST launch, you have seen a large number of commodities or large number of product categories where there has been a GST cut. I think you have in 28% only exists for a limited number of limited number of categories, not even 50 items. And that also is likely to be pruned as government goes forward, really based on requirement. Categories like cement and paints, they could possibly see a cut in the coming months. But certainly this government needs revenues. Every government needs revenues. On the one hand, we have to give assurance to the states that their revenues will be protected for 5 years. And how on earth do you think you can get all this money by bringing it down to the world's modest level? I think let's talk some sense. In no category has the rates have been hiked. If you look at the pre-GST rates, excise duty, VAT, all this put together, I think the rates today are much lower. I think rates in a large number of product categories have been pruned drastically. So I think let's talk sense. And as far as electoral implications of the GST is concerned, and naysayers like Sadanand might expect some trouble. We have seen that in Gujarat. A lot was made out of the Surat protest about GST, but you have seen how people voted. They also want to move on. This BJP swept polls in Surat. So certainly I think you can turn out, you can remain as naysayers, you can want to predict gloom, but people of this country including the trading community, want to move on. They certainly see GST as an improved regime. Notwithstanding some kind of initial teething troubles that people may have had, it's really going on very smoothly. In 1 year, you can't expect a complete transition from a 70 years rut that you have actually created.
GVL Narasimha Rao, just hold that thought with you, because I'm going to come back to you on just that point. But Rohan Gupta, I want to take up the larger point. The reason why Mr. Chidambaram or Mr. Gandhi are criticizing GSTs or calling it the Gabbar Singh Tax is because of the multiple rate structure. And that's the one big criticism against the GST. It makes it cumbersome, makes it complex, no denying that. But which political party was prepared to or will agree to just 1 or 2 rate slabs in a country like India? Can you just afford to have 1 or 2 rate slabs? And which is perhaps why GST never became a reality. The pragmatic approach to it was that you go with multiple rate slabs, let it happen for a while, let it put it to test, and then eventually bring the rates down. I mean, was it going to be politically pragmatic to get states on board with just 1 or 2 rate structures? Rohan Gupta?
See, first of all, I am not in favor of what Mr. GVL told about 28% rate slab, because it is their party which opposed even 18% tax slab which was proposed by UPA's GST proposal. The other thing what you are talking about is in terms of increase or higher rate slab, then why the GST Council has reduced the rate of taxes when Gujarat election was around. Mr. GVL has forgotten that he is giving example of Surat. Their margin in Surat has gone down by 90%. So just saying that you have won election in Surat, people are not impacted by GST is totally useless. One more thing, when you implement any policy in this country, we know that we are a country which is dominated by small traders. You have to think of person who is sitting below the pyramid. You cannot think just of 10% top people and implement the law. Even today, 90% of indirect taxes are paid by 10% top firm. That doesn't mean that you can, ignore the other 90% which are below the slab. Here the issue is the complication, the implementation, the higher tax rate. Mr. GVL should know that whenever the tax rates are high, it invites tax evasion, and that's what is happening. People are not ready to join this chain, and one of the, I think, experts on your panel, he told that I am willing to pay GST, but if other person has not paid, how can I be part of the chain? So that's the biggest issue, and the government is losing revenue because of this impractical slab of 28% and other higher slabs. Unless and until that is reduced or streamlined, GST is not going to be successful,
numbers tell a very
the
different...
below person is not going to be happy.
Rohan Gupta, the numbers do tell us a little bit of a different story there. I get your point. I think rates are high, they need to come down. But I think that was the apprehension. And Nilesh, I want to come to you on this. The apprehension was that GST will be inflationary. That didn't happen, unlike a lot of other countries where a single tax regime has been rolled out. Do you believe it is this multi-layered tax structure that helped mitigate prices going higher? Because the new very close to the existing rates, and which is why inflation did not go up and GST turned out to be non-inflationary.
So one, we also have to give credit at the same time to RBI, which has followed a fairly tight monetary policy to control inflation. So one aspect of inflation is controlled by RBI's tight monetary policy, limited liquidity, high real interest rates, which have kind of restricted demand, which can, push up inflation. The second credit obviously goes to GST, because by and large they made the arrangement in a manner which was revenue neutral. There was one interesting point which was brought out, that the total GST tax payment is coming at about 5 lakh crore a month, and there is input tax credit of about 4 lakh crore a month. Net somewhere between 95,000 crore to 1 lakh crore is the net GST collection. Now we haven't introduced invoice matching, partly because of cumbersome involvement of technology, partly because so many small and medium enterprises are not ready for it. My feeling is that not necessarily in next 6-12 months, but post-election, if invoice matching can be introduced, in that scenario, the tax compliance can go up substantially. and that will result into the real benefit of GST coming through. And that combination can really create very good advantages of GST to the Indian economy.
I completely agree with you. I think invoice matching, even a section of the industry believes, will save them from disputes and penalties later on. But I think I just want to stick with rates for just one more moment and talk to Sadanand there. And Sadanand, you know, while everybody says 28% should go, shouldn't there be a higher tax on demerit or sin goods? And the only way perhaps to dissolve that rate slab will be to put a cess, and that once again is distortionary. That once again does away with the whole spirit of GST when you put an additional cess. In fact, GST was supposed to scrap a multiplicity of taxes and cesses, and now you have a new levy in the form of compensation cess. You have one on automobiles. There could probably be one on sugar. And where does that stop? Because, you know, there could be one leather lobby asking for a cess, a jute lobby. I'm just perplexed with the cesses, and more so, how do you do away with 28% without levying a cess? And isn't that against the whole ethos and spirit of the GST?
Absolutely. So the whole problem is that we are trying to introduce something which is philosophically grounded in another idea of taxation, and we're trying to introduce it in a place and where the political class is almost uniformly socialist in its orientation. You know, this absurd idea that, oh, how can you have a different rate on a Mercedes-Benz and a pair of chappals? Well, that is the whole idea of GST, right? The whole idea is that you have a flat rate, you keep it simple. Look at, I mean, one of the best ones is in Australia, where it's a flat 10% on goods and services. Of course, you can have then a special sort of, on certain things you can decide that you will have no taxes at all, and maybe you can even have sort of demerits on certain things that you want to discourage. But the basic idea is that you strive for simplicity and you generate additional revenues because economic activity picks up. The way everyone is discussing this in India is that the only way to generate those revenues is, we're speaking like tax inspectors. The way to think about this is that if you simplify, if you bring more people into the net, as you generate more and more economic activity, you get a huge bang for your buck. The second thing is that this piecemeal approach that the government has taken, which is, well, I'll move this one from 18 to 12, I'll move something else from 28 to 18. Frankly, that is a recipe for corruption. Now, the beauty of a GST is that there's no lobbying. You have the rate, you know what it's going to be. And when India's GST was first conceptualized by Mr. Kelkar and others, the rate that was being spoken of was a flat 14%. Now, why can't we aspire to that? Instead of making excuses and instead of getting into this Jugaad syndrome where, I'll move your khakra from 18 to 12, and you move my pickle from 5 to 7. I mean, it's absurd on the face of it. And I wish that the government, which is so good at projecting itself as bold, actually approach this in a bold, clear, simple manner.
Fair point indeed. But I think Viren Shah wanted to add a quick point to rates, and then I will move on to formalization of the economy, a point that was brought about as well. Viren, you wanted to make a point on rates. GVL, I'm just coming to you next. Give me a minute.
Yeah, I guess one tax is not practical in India because of the various products which falls at 5%, and if they increase to 10 or 12%, they won't be able to accept that. So I guess 5% and 12% is the perfect rate structure in India. Why? Because the traders, if they want to pay 18% and 20% on upfront on the invoices, they will think twice because their fund is blocked. They don't take a bank loan, they use their own fund, and that is the reason there is a tax evasion happening in the three town and the villages. There is a whole chain, they don't pay at all. So government is losing the revenue, and somebody who's genuinely honest wants to pay the GST because of other channel is not paying. They have no choice but to go with the channel which are not paying taxes. This is the biggest problem with the going to happen in the future also.
Right. Viren, you made an interesting point there, but I'll go across to Nilesh Shah and I think then to GVL Narasimha Rao in just a minute. Nilesh Shah, the formalization of the economy and the GST's big expectation, the big aim was that it is going to gear towards the formalization of the economy. But if you look at the cash in the economy and if you look at the kind of demand for cash, it's at an all-time high. I mean, you know, we back to the peak levels before demonetization. The HSBC report says that actually the demand for cash has risen instead of falling down. What explains that? If GST was supposed to formalize the economy, why are we seeing so much of cash in the system? And why such demand, why such aggravated demand for cash all over again?
So if I see cash as a percentage of GDP, in November 2016, it was 12%. Today, it is 10.5%. So clearly, yes, absolute quantum is increased, but the relative quantum is decreased. And this is visible more in urban area, less in rural and semi-urban area. So I don't know how HSBC is saying, maybe they are looking at absolute number, but I think all of us will agree that relative is what one should look at. The second thing is formalization of economy. By historical accidents, we went towards small, mini, micro enterprises, but we failed to create larger enterprises. And wherever we created larger enterprises, we have seen the benefits. In the IT industry today, top 5 companies command lion's share. And that's where we are exporting $60–70 billion of IT revenues. And our IT companies are today valued almost at par with the Western worlds in terms of size and at a premium to developed worlds in terms of relative valuation. Now imagine if in our IT industry we had micro, small and mini enterprises. Do you think any foreign company would have given their contract to our IT companies? Answer is no. In automobile, we had seen micro, small and mini enterprises in terms of capacity, in terms of product. And then we invited Suzuki to set up unit in India. Today we are exporting motor cars to Japan. And the entire motor car market is divided among formal enterprises, large enterprises. Today we are producing cars which is as good as in any other part of the world. And we are on our way to become top 5 automobile markets in the world. So we have seen benefits of formalization in IT sector, we have seen benefits of formalization in auto sector. Can we create similar benefits in many other sectors? If that happens, then growth will invariably increase, employment will invariably increase, tax compliance will invariably increase, but most importantly will become productive, will become competitive. That is the need of the hour for India.
Indeed. That's an interesting point, that you've got to play on the economies of scale there. But GVL Narasimha Rao, while you know, Nilesh Shah blunts the argument of formalization and he believes there has been formalization on account of the GST, my question is that GST was also supposed to add between 1.5 to 2 percentage points to our GDP growth. When do you see that happen? Of course, teething troubles set aside, by when do you believe that sort of a economic benefit can be leveraged out of the GST?
No, I think it was not expected to happen in the very first year. In fact, it was all along known this will take some time for GST to stabilize. In the first few months, we have actually seen the economy taking a short-term hit because of the transition from a pre-GST to a GST era. So certainly this improvement or enhancement in the GDP is expected to happen over 2 to 3 years. But we certainly wanted to cushion the common man. Certainly a large number of products commodities were kept at 0% tax rate, at 5% tax rate. That's the sensitivity had to be shown. You cannot do it like Australia did. It's a sure recipe for disaster. I think you cannot. It is neither socially desirable nor is it politically possible. Let's also understand that. You cannot expect, you can get an early increase in your overall growth rate, but if it were to happen along with a big hike in inflation, can we really afford it? Can a large mass of your people who live on basic subsistence incomes, can they really afford to take such a hit? So certainly it's always good to talk about altruistic or ideal scenarios, but let's understand those scenarios don't exist here. And if certainly we should move towards lowering of taxes, but that can happen only if you can protect revenues. Government cannot afford to lose on revenues.
Fair point.
As it is, we have a fiscal deficit.
Okay,
we
fair
cannot
point
afford
there,
to increase.
GVL.
I think let's talk realistic.
Okay, GVL Narasimha Rao. Yes, GVL Narasimha Rao, that's a realistic pitch, but let me go across to Rohan Gupta who wants to make a point there. But Rohan Gupta, also want to point out a figure to you. There are 1 crore new IT filers in fiscal year 18. Don't you agree it's on account of things like, one of them has to be the GST, which are perhaps making people more conscious to pay taxes, making it difficult to escape the formal economy and evade paying taxes.
Can you repeat? I'm not able to hear you properly.
On that count? I am saying there are 1 crore new tax filers in fiscal year 2017-18. And can you hear me now? If you can hear me now, there are new income tax filers to the tune of 1 crore in the last financial year. Will you agree it's on account of things like the GST, which is making it difficult for people to evade taxes?
No, I don't agree with that, because if you see the tax paid by them, there is a report that there is a reduction in receipt of absolute income tax, and that's the failure of GST. See, one more thing, Mr. GVL was saying that we have cared about the lower citizen of country and zero tax rates and all. Then why it is not getting reflected in GDP of this country? In recent report by World Bank, they have criticized GST and said that in the survey of 115 countries, the Indian GST is found to be second most typical and difficult tax regime. If your policy is right, it will reflect in your GDP, it will reflect in your exports, it will reflect in your numbers of, the way tax collection is done. So none is happening. Your intention might be anything. What is important is results on ground. After 1 year, if you see the software side of it, there are practical problems on software side, filing of returns and all. So I think government need to do something on the structural side, making it less complex, making it user friendly.
Right. Okay. Right. Rohan Gupta and GVL Narasimha Rao, I've got little time on this show, and my next round has to start with politicians. I've got my 3 other guests waiting, so keep it simple and brief. But I have a question for both of you, for both the Congress and the BJP. Every politician across the political spectrum, and I'm now looking forward on the GST, talks about addressing high cost of petrol and diesel every time there's a price hike by moving fuel under the GST, as if it was a magic wand, it will happen. But, I mean, have both of you consulted your state leadership? Are they on board with that? Are they willing to let go of revenue on that count? The BJP ruled states, and 21 of them have not obliged and reduced VAT. And nor have the Congress states. You realistically expect them to squeeze their revenue by agreeing to this move? Let me take this across to GVL Narasimha Rao before I take it across to the Congress.
No, I think that has been considered, but certainly there is, I think state governments are not really, have not shown interest right from the beginning, because it's a huge contributor to the revenues of the state governments. And even if you keep this at 28%, I think still both the center and state will lose substantially in terms of revenues. But this is certainly something that we would like to move towards. I hope this can happen in a reasonable time frame, and that is possible. If you can even cap it at 28%, I think consumers will get big relief. But how do states overcome it? How can center really make good the losses that the state might incur on account of bringing it under the GST? These are questions still will need to be really looked into. The center is certainly examining this. You have heard the petroleum minister comment on this. I'm sure there is a lot of activity and a lot of study underway, and that is possibly one solution to really bring about some kind of a lowering of taxes or lowering of rates of petroleum products.
Right. I think that's where the two parties agree with each other, that let's bring it down under the GST. I don't think your state leadership does. But Rohan Gupta, has the Congress consulted its 4 chief ministers before talking about bringing it down under the GST? Because the state leaderships are not on board with this at all.
See, if you remember the UPA's proposal of GST, why it got delayed is just because of this reason. We were trying to build consensus among the states because this is very, very important. The basic consumer of this country is really getting hit by the petroleum prices today. And Mr. GVL is talking about only GST. My question to him, if you really want to give, benefit or relief to the end consumer, there are many ways by reducing other taxes. The point here is, whenever this kind of tax is implemented, you have to make sure that the common man, the hit on him should be reduced or should be minimized. That's what is not happening in this tax. And that's why we see that highest rate of petroleum products and the common man is getting hit. Why this government couldn't have worked out the consensus among states before rolling out this GST? I think it could have been done, but for this government, important thing was to roll it as early as possible to get political mileage rather than thinking about the common man or a small trader.
Right. Rohan Gupta, the reason why GST could not go through with the earlier governments was because you were non-negotiable on petrol. States were not willing. I think that was the negotiating tool. But Nilesh, I want to ask you a more, a more mathematical question on this. Is bringing petrol products under GST going to be easy at all? Because revenue neutral rate will ensure that prices could actually shoot up in certain states. And will they agree? Because I don't think the common man understands that bringing petrol or diesel into the GST necessarily means rates going down.
I think if we follow prudent macroeconomic policy, whereby growth comes without steroids of credit, which results into NPA, whereby growth comes without creating fiscal deficit, where growth comes through investment, which ultimately brings down inflation, then common men will be happy. What we need is a consensus among political parties to create sound macroeconomic platform where ease of doing business increases, where we become more productive, more competitive, where our tax laws, as Chanakya mentioned, extracts tax like a madhumakhi extracts honey, like the bee extracts honey. Those are the things which we need. And we just hope and pray that we as a nation get all those things so that we can go and bridge the gap vis-a-vis our competitors like China. In 1984, India and China were of similar size in per capita GDP, in total GDP. Today they are 6 times bigger than us, 7 times bigger than us. We have done something wrong. We need to correct it so that over next 25 years we are at par with China and not 1/6 of China.
Absolutely, and I think the big picture needs to be looked at. But Sadanand Dhume, will come to you on this before I go on to the tax terror part of this. And the question to you really is that let us for a moment presume it's doable. I'm just curious to know, will states agree to this? We are 10 months away from general elections, and I think the economic side of this is that some big ticket items are still out of the GST, which is why there is no seamless flow of input credit. Alcohol, electricity, petrol, real estate. At best, I think we can get natural gas in, but bringing real estate will be impossible. You need a constitution amendment. Is it then time that we in India make our peace that this is what the GST will include or exclude, at least in the foreseeable future, and definitely up until elections 2019? Is perhaps that the cost of a political economy?
I mean, I personally, if I had to bet, I would not bet on any dramatic changes between now and the next election, right? We are definitely, everyone has hit the pause button. I think that, from a perfectly cynical perspective, if you are in the opposition, it makes sense to stall further improvements because they're going to try and use this, stick this as a knife in the BJP side and turn it. That is bad for the country, but that is how politics works in this country. And in most places. So that's just the nature of politics. So yes, I think the discussion for us to have is not what is fixable between now and 2019. I think the discussion for us to have is how do we get to what was envisioned? When the GST was sold to the people of India, when it was circulated among policy wonks and so on, what was the ideal that we were aspiring towards? And even if we can't get exactly to that, how close to that can we get? That should be it. For the BJP, I would just have one piece of advice, which is that, I'm quite surprised that, increasingly I come across spokespersons on television who sound as though they are spokespersons for the Indian Revenue Service. They need to sound more like they are spokespersons for common Indians, for small businessmen, for people who are affected by these tremendously complex rates and complex filing systems. Those are the people who matter. And so framing everything in terms of, my revenue is ticked up by this and ticked up by that, I can understand where it comes from. Personally, I think that is really getting it backwards.
Okay, I'll go across to GVL in just a minute from now to get a reaction to this. But Viren Shah, I will come to you because the expansion of the tax base is what will make GST successful, is what will bring rates down like you have said it will. But, there are many anti-evasion measures that are also going to be in the works. And already the industry has complained of the taxman and the tax harassment of sorts. Is that what you are concerned about? That there could be a very aggressive sort of, I'm not going to use the word tax terror, but a more aggressive tax regime?
I think before the government should do that, I think they should first clear all the issues, teething problems, especially the percentage of the tax bracket to bring it down. They have to bring the petrol and diesel under the GST regime. Otherwise, there is no meaning of the GST if you pick and choose few items out of it, saying that the state government is not ready to listen. After all, BJP ruling state, and only one phone call and one message to all the BJP state, they all should come together, and especially for the common man, they should bring all under the GST. And once everything is in place, I don't see traders will going to be argue or go with tax evasion. Things are going to be, I think, as easy as for everybody else. I don't see that those things are coming in on our way.
Okay, so a quick last question. And I'm going to take it with both Nilesh and Sadanand, and please keep it brief and then go across to the politicians. There are many issues, Nilesh, that remain to be addressed, but the fact that some of the naughty ones have been resolved, does that give confidence to Indian industry that the rest will be sorted out as well, at least as far as the council is concerned?
Undoubtedly, in July 2017, when GST was introduced and we were meeting companies, they were quite apprehensive how it will be rolled out. Delay of e-way bill also created a small window of opportunity where unorganized sector evaded taxes massively and created tough times for organized sector. But in April 2018, when e-way bill was introduced, it again closed that window substantially. Now larger enterprises are definitely happy about GST. For them, this is behind. The medium and small enterprises which were doing their business, honestly paying full share of tax, they are also comfortable with GST. Of course, there are glitches which needs to be sorted out, and for which there should be live communication between government and the traders. But overall, GST's benefits will start accruing to India, and which is where we did see fourth quarter GDP growth coming at 7.7%. The side effects of GST rollout is now behind us. We could be looking forward to future with more hope.
Okay, very quickly then to GVL Narasimha Rao and Rohan Gupta. Most decisions in the council have been taken through consensus and amicably. States have a 33% vote, center has a 66% vote. You need a 75% vote for things to go through, and so far there's just been one dissent. Elections 10 months away, how hopeful are you of the bonhomie continuing? GVL Narasimha Rao.
No, I'm sure the states see a benefit in this partnership with the center. So I don't see politics really playing out even in the next 10 months as far as matters of policy or GST administration are concerned. And I certainly expect, because there have been many elections in between, and I have no reason to be pessimistic about what will happen in the next 10 months. And we certainly speak for the common man. I don't know why Mr. Sadadan thinks we speak like officers. No, we speak for the common man. That's why we are saying you cannot have a 12% tax rate across all categories, something that experts like you would be advocating. We speak for the common man. We certainly think you have to protect them. You have to ensure that this is anti-inflationary. You cannot expect them to take a hit. We are pro-farmer. We've ensured that all agricultural commodities attract 0% tax. I think if you were to put 12% on them, you can understand the kind of impact this will have even on agriculture. So certainly, I think we are a party, we are a government. We have, you see, the fact that no television channel, Supriya, I would like to give you credit for debating it on the first anniversary. The fact that no other channel has approached me or no other channel is doing a debate shows that GST has gone off very smoothly. Otherwise, you would have had, I would have been busy morning to night. I would have been busy from morning to night debating GST.
Right.
You are the only channel I am debating. So things have gone off very smoothly.
GVL, I'm glad a television appears.
Your analysis is really,
success, but I'll take you
there are no words.
Rohan Gupta,
I compliment to you.
Listen to
Nobody
me.
else
GST,
is interested in something
was
that
a good
has gone
example.
well.
And I take that compliment with equal grace. But Rohan Gupta, very quickly, you know, GST is supposed to be this shining example of cooperative federalism. The council has worked well. There's been a certain amount of bonhomie there. Will you assure consumers at large that elections 2019 is not going to distort that? Quick, I have no time on my show now.
See, I agree with one of your panelists who told, one of your panelists gave example of one of the countries where GST was responsible for changing the government. I can see the ground level sentiment of a small trader who is really not comfortable with the current system, with the way the software is functioning. If you see the exporters of this country, still there is an issue of pending credit which is not getting resolved. Still there is an issue of highest tax slabs of 28%. Still there is an issue of multiple forms filing. Still there is an issue of, you know, compliance every month. So I feel that at ground level, the way BJP has gone about and thought of only 10% on the top of the pyramid, I think it's going to really hit them bad as far as 2019 elections are concerned, and it will definitely prove to be Gabbar Singh Tax for them. I am sure about it.
All right, so we started off with the GST being a glass half full, but we've gone to the Gabbar Singh Tax acronym once again. But I can't thank this panel for keeping the discussion alive and spirited. Sadanand Dume, Nilesh Shah, Viren Shah, Rohan Gupta, and of course GVL Narasimha Rao for sparing time and speaking to us this evening on the first anniversary of the GST. We at ET Now are big believers that every Indian who should be paying tax. There should be no tax evasion at all. And if GST is going to ensure formalization of the economy, then so be it. If it entails that more and more people will come under the tax net, if it entails that the tax to the GDP ratio will improve, we are all for the GST. For us, the teething troubles may have taken the sheen off this grand tax reform to an extent, but GST is a reform whose time has certainly come, and India must embrace GST wholeheartedly. For us, it's a little over the glass being half full. Thanks very much for being with us on this edition of the India Development Debate.